Today our topic is open access. Is OA okay? I'd like to remind students in particular that as you're writing papers and going through your careers here, that panic is the #1 killer of scuba divers. So, might want to find a buddy. That would be librarians, your faculty, and breathe. We really would like you to succeed here. And today we're going to talk about navigating the waters of open access, publishing and access. So today, the objectives of this lecture will be to define the concept of open access publishing, describe current trends with open access publishing. 3, distinguish between high quality, that is credible, and low quality open access publications. Yeah, I don't know if a lot of you are old enough to remember Steve Martin. Remember the old shark routine? Try this. Oh, the shark bites. Some of you are too young. Anyway, there are a lot of sharks out there in this open access ocean, as I like to call it. We'd like you also to understand the article submission to an open access journal. And then lastly, but not finally, learn about UNE's open access repository, DUNE, digital UNE. Open access, as is defined by Suber, 2012, page 4. Literature is digital, online, free of charge, and free of most copyright and licensing restrictions. Remember that it's digital, free to the user, not necessarily to the author or publisher, and no restrictions on access. So they're out there to use. Today we'll be talking about a couple of different OA publishing models. The gold model, in gold, on the left, slightly gold, is delivered by journals, peer-reviewed. Everybody know what PEER is? Peer. You are all peers, a group of experts in a field. Usually supported by author fees as opposed to subscription fees or toll fees, TOLL. Direct, delayed, and hybrid. The green open access publishing model is delivered by repositories, may or may not be peer-reviewed, can be accomplished through federal or institutional policies and or author self-archiving. And UNE, your very own University of New England, has a repository called DUNE. It's fairly new, what, couple years, I think? 6 months up and running. But UNE, as of yet, doesn't have an open access policy, but we might. The benefits of open access, and these are all increasing, hence the arrow up. It provides scholarly networking on a global scale. The potential effect of research can increase. Accessibility of articles increases. Fast publication, everybody likes fast these days. Citations to the article and the impact factor of the journal may increase. Helps relieve financial strain on libraries. And open access allows wider dissemination and quicker citing. And now I'd like to introduce to you Beth Dyer, who's a reference librarian here at the University of New England, and she will take you into the deeper shark-infested waters of open access publishing.
Right. All right, thanks Barb. Hi everybody, thanks for coming. We're going to talk just a little bit about how open access journals are different from traditional. And by traditional subscription journals, those are the things we subscribe through the library. We pay close to $2 million a year for our electronic resources, including electronic journals and databases. And you can read the articles because, we're subscribing and paying for those. So now how do open access journals differ? There's author fees. There can be author fees. Their peer review policies might be different. the licensing and copyright laws may be different, and there are author archiving policies. So I'll just take a quick minute and go through those 4 big differences. It's actually a misconception that open access publishing always costs money to the author. Peter Suber is considered like an open access guru. He's associated with Harvard. He wrote a book in 2012 called Open Access, which is in fact an open access book. You can read it freely online. But he says that when he wrote the book in 2012, that 70% of the open access journals in this directory of open access journals do not charge author fees that you don't have to pay to publish in. If a journal does charge an author fee, the fees can range anywhere from $250 for like maybe publishing like a case report or a short article to $3,000. And often the range is $1,000 to $2,000 for the author fee. So that's shifting the cost from the user or the library that gives the access to the user to the author. And then the author costs then sometimes get shifted to the department or to the university or to the funding. And Dr. Brazeau is here to tell us a little bit more about that in a minute. Some people claim that author fees might create an information bias because some authors may not have the ability to pay to publish their work. However, most open access journals do provide waivers to people who can't afford to publish. So peer review is required. That's another misconception. Some people think that they don't practice peer review. They do. Most use the traditional pre-publication blind peer review model, like the traditional subscription journals do. Some are using open peer review, like a very well-known open access journal, BMC Medicine, uses open peer review, meaning the reviewers write a report about this article, and then the author can read the report. They know who the reviewer is, and the reader can read the reviews as well. And then some are even using a post-publication model. There's a journal called F1000 Research. It comes from a database, from a resource called Faculty of 1000, and we subscribe to this resource. It's available through the library. And what they do is you submit your article. They do a quick check to make sure it's, quality and ethically sound and everything, and they'll put it up within a week. Then they invite referees to review it. You can revise your article, and the final version is then indexed so that people can find it in PubMed and things like that. So they're posting the article, then it's being reviewed, and then it's being revised, and you can read the reviews online too of what people have said about that article. So there's also some differences in licensing and copyright. The new model is Creative Commons Attribution License. It's recommended by the Open Access Scholarly Publishing Association, and that means that you as a user are free to share, adapt, use the work as long as you attribute it to the original author. The author retains the copyright of the work. The traditional model that most subscription journals use, and even some open access journals, is this US Fair Use guideline that it's more restrictive. It can be vague. It's kind of hard to figure out if you fit into that model sometimes. And basically, if you want to use a large portion of a work, you have to seek permission to exceed a certain amount. And in that model, the publisher retains the copyright, not the author of the article. So all open access is free to the user, and they use the word gratis to describe that. But then they also have this word libre, which means it's not necessarily, the use of it is not unrestricted. So the cost is free to the user, but the reuse of it is not necessarily unrestricted. And that's where it can get a little tricky. There's this whole spectrum of open access regarding how you can reuse the material. So author archiving just means the author has a copy of the manuscript, and it's maybe the final copy before it's actually been published in the journal, and it possibly has been already peer-reviewed, it's been accepted by the journal, and that last copy can then be archived by the author on a personal website or in an institutional repository like ours called DUNE, or in another type of, any place that's not the publisher website. The author can self-archive it in another place. So open access journals allow you to do that, and some of them do that for you. Traditional journals, some of them allow that, and some of them don't. And Bethany will talk more about that as part of her role is figuring that stuff out. So if you're getting ready to publish something, you have to check out this thing called a copyright transfer agreement. When the article is accepted, who's going to have the copyright, you or the publisher? There's a whole database called Sherpa Romeo that you can figure out a journal's policy about whether or not you're allowed to deposit your stuff in a repository. There's a lot of mandates now, federal and institutional. So a lot of you I know are familiar with using PubMed to find literature, right? And there's this repository called PubMed Central now that's associated with that. And that's from the National Institute of Health, had a mandate in 2008 that anybody who had federally funded research had to deposit their article in PubMed Central within 12 months so that it was freely available for use for the taxpayers who paid for the research. That's being greatly expanded. There's a bill in Congress right now called FASTR, F-A-S-T-R, and that's going to expand to any federal agency that funds over $100 million a year in extramural research, and that'll be, the Department of Education, Commerce, just a whole list of places that will have to make federally funded research freely available to the public, and that's, happening now. And then authors can negotiate their level of archiving with the publisher at the time that their article is accepted. Some institutions have policies. We, as Barb mentioned, UNE, our repository is new. We don't have a policy yet. Maybe we will in the future. That usually comes from the faculty. So the current trends are that we're getting more scholarly communication, seeing huge increases in open access journals, open access articles, and open access books. So raise your hand if you have, at some point in your career, not purchased a required textbook because of the cost. Okay, almost everybody. That's a huge issue, and there's a study that came out recently that showed that's a large percentage of students, especially at the undergraduate level, aren't buying their books. And so there's this open textbook movement, which I think will be like the next wave of open access, that some institutions are encouraging faculty to use open access textbooks so that students have access to them free of cost. So we'll see what happens there. So we're seeing a lot more repositories like ours. We're seeing more public access to federally funded research, and we're seeing on the rise, more cost to the author and or the institution. The bad stuff we're seeing increasing is predatory publishers and maybe some scientific misconduct in the form of plagiarism and some other things. So I'm going to talk about that real quickly. On the decreasing side, so we're seeing less cost to the user. That's a good thing. Some people feel that in some open access journals, there's a decreasing quality of articles and or peer review. And it may be negatively affecting the ability of promotion and tenure committees to judge candidates, because some people are publishing in journals that are not familiar, and there's a lot of new venues out there. So just to give you a quick overview of current trends, the red is the number of open access journals. The blue line is the number of open access articles based on a couple studies from 1993 to 2011. You can just kind of see what kind of increases open access is having. At this point, this was only through 2011. There were already up to about 7,000 open access journals and 350,000 articles. And now this data is a couple years old, and I'm sure it's much more now. It's definitely here to stay. That data, number-wise, this study by Lasco in 2011 found an annual average growth rate of 18% in journals every year, open access journals, and in articles, 30% a year. You compare that to traditional publishing. There was a group that looked at 300 years of traditional journal publishing, and they saw only 3.5% increase in journals per year and 3% increase in journal articles per year. So open access is just growing by leaps and bounds. This Guy Lewis is a librarian, a dean of libraries. He wrote an article called The Inevitability of Open Access. He considers gold open access a disruptive innovation, and he thinks it's going to change basically the whole way scholarly communication happens. And he projects, based on some data, that 90% of journal articles will be open access as soon as 2020. So here's the other current trend, the negative, the shark-infested water that Barb was mentioning. There's a guy named Jeffrey Beals, who's a librarian in Colorado. He has a blog called scholarlyoa.com, and he's kind of dedicated his career to exposing predatory open access publishers. He claims, he wrote an opinion piece in Nature last year, that predatory publishers are corrupting open access. He says to become a scholarly publisher, all you need is a computer, a website, and the ability to create unique journal titles. And he has a list on his website of predatory publishers, and he, by name, he names the publisher. He also has some unique journal titles, and he basically says, do not publish in these are scams, and sort of trying to expose the bad stuff that's going on. And if you just look at that graph, just in the past 4 years, the number of predatory publishers that he has exposed, his list now has almost 500 publishers on it, starting, I think he had like 27 when he started in 2011. So that's the growth in predatory publishing and open access that he's seen. So he talks about trickery, that there's a lot of deception going on at the publisher level. There's a legitimate publisher, Springer. They have an open access arm called Springer Open. Somebody is advertising Stringer Open and, just trying to fool people. At the journal level, reputable, the Journal of Parasitology from the American Society of Parasitologists. This is the open access Journal of Parasitology. And if somebody's not paying close attention, or, they may end up in the wrong journal is basically what it comes down to. This is designed to fool, so you can't really see it on the right margin in the small print, but they're telling you they have an impact index and an ISJN, and those are kind of librarian-ish terms, but they're bogus metrics that this person made up. Every journal has an ISSN, like a book has an ISBN. It's a unique number, and they made up, a number for themselves. So, and then we're seeing deception at the article level. The article on the left, Chemistry of Pectin and its Pharmaceutical Uses, is a legitimately published article in a legitimate, traditional, peer-reviewed journal and published in 2003. The one on the lower right is published in open access scientific reports. Exact same content, different title, different authors. So they've literally just lifted this paper, changed the title slightly, and put their names on it. And it's becoming not that unusual. So that's one of the downsides of open access publishing, unfortunately. So how do you evaluate quality? How do you know if what you're looking at is valid, whether it's an article or whether you're questioning the journal that the article is published in? Well, just like conventional toll access or subscription journals, some open access journals are great, they're first rate, and some are bottom feeders, and that's what this Peter Suber from Harvard has said. So we try to teach our students to use criteria to evaluate any resource, and you can use the same type of criteria. You just want to look at authority, who's putting it out, accuracy, how current is it, is there bias that's obvious. You can also look at the explicit scope of the journal. You can see who their target readership is supposed to be. Do they have inclusion criteria for what they will include in that journal? Do they have, their peer review policies really spelled out? Do they give you information on rejection and acceptance rates? Archiving policy is huge because some researchers are finding they publish their article in an open access journal, which then disappears a month later, and their article with it. So they no longer, can point people to their published article because that journal has disappeared. So there's a little bit of specific help if you are trying to evaluate an open access resource. There's really no standard criteria right now, but there is a thing called the Directory of Open Access Journals. You can look to see if it's included in that directory. You can find information about any specific journal in a database called ULRIX, which we have through the library. PubMed, you probably know, has a journals database you can find information about. This thing called an impact factor. There's a database called Journal Citation Reports, which the library subscribes to. You can see if the journal has, that has to do with how often the articles in the journal get cited. And the higher the impact factor, the more well-respected the journal is. And you can kind of compare journals within the same field and look at that. You can see if the journal is indexed in a database like Scopus or PubMed, because those have strict inclusion criteria. And you can also look at this guy, Jeffrey Beal's blog, list of predatory publishers, and see if a journal's on there. So where do you find reputable stuff? Well, again, this directory of open access journals, it currently has almost 10,000 journal titles in it. To be honest, I am not positive. I totally use that as a quality measure. They have inclusion criteria to screen journals there, but they don't look that rigorous to me, so I'm not sure about that. Some great, highly respected open access journals are Public Library of Science, Biomed Central, Bio1, and things that you would find in PubMed Central have been screened. And some of the traditional publishers like Springer and Elsevier and some others are doing some open access publishing too. And I had mentioned this Faculty of 1,000 database that we have that has an open access journal. So I'm going to ask Dr. Brazeau to talk to us because he has experience publishing in an open access journal, and he can talk a little bit about what led to that decision and what that process involves and how it's funded and that sort of thing. And then we'll have time for a few minutes of questions before Bethany tells us about our open access repository that we hope some of you will deposit your stuff in. Thanks.
That's embarrassing. How I got into open access, it's just an accident. I mean, we were looking, not really an accident, but we were looking to publish papers. PLOS One was out there. A number of my colleagues had published there, and they suggested we try there, and so we did. I mean, in terms of the sorts of decisions I use and where to put a paper, obviously you want to put it in the very best journal you can possibly convince to take the thing. And you get that sort of information by the sorts of journals you look at yourself, the sorts of journals your colleagues are publishing in, the sorts of journals that ask us to review papers. And so those are the sorts of things that went in. Impact factor also, if it is indeed indexed in PubMed, is another issue. And again, yeah, the best thing is to talk to colleagues and see where they're publishing and the sorts of papers that, or the sorts of journals you're reading in. I like open access because it's typically faster to publication than traditional journals. Some of the other journals that we've published in, the wait time is almost a year or more between getting acceptance and ultimately appearing in the print version. The online submission is oftentimes, well, it varies. Originally, PLOS One was a pain to online because you basically had to format it yourself and everything else and submit it to it. And I spent several hours sending figures, and it would just say reject, and go back and try to play with the figure again. I ultimately had to buy a copy of Photoshop, yeah, in order to find a format that they would finally take with the correct ratio and all the rest of it. They've cleaned that up quite a bit, so they now take TIFF files and stuff for your documents. They say there's no limit. One of the advantages to publishing in open access is there's no limit to how long your paper. That's probably not true because someone has got to review it, and the reviewers are going to hack it to death if it runs too long or you go off topic. So I don't know that you can really use open access to get some really long tome published. Because you still have to get it past the reviewers, and we oftentimes comment, this is way, way too long, we need to lose, several figures are not necessary, on and on. The journals that I've dealt with and the ones I'm familiar with all have publication fees, usually running about $1,500 to $2,000. This is actually not anything new. Many of the society journals that I've published in the past had page charges. Ecology, Evolution, all of those had page charges. So long ago, all grants that we submit have a line in them, publication costs, and we set aside $1,000 to $2,000 a year in the second and third and fourth and fifth years to cover publication costs. And I've never taken any flack from funding agencies about putting that money in here. I also know that many of the departments here at UNE, as well as other schools, will will pay your publication costs, because it's in their best interest that their faculty get published. And so if you go to your chair or your dean, I typically find the dean less useful. There's a reason for that, but we won't go there. They're oftentimes more than willing and have monies available to get, to pay the subscription or the publication costs. As has been mentioned, a number of the journals like Wiley and Springer now have open access arms as well, and you can, for some of their journals, identify that I want this to be open access. And so that's also very, very nice. And it is nice, because I really hate it when I'm searching for journal articles and find out that this thing is locked out and that I've got to pay some $35. That generally means that that paper will not get cited in my paper, because I'm not going to pay the $35 to have it sent to me. So I'm not going to cite it, and I just sort of cross my fingers that the author of that particular paper isn't a reviewer. That's usually when you pay that cost. So, but in general, it's, as it's been said, there's very little to distinguish nowadays. Most of the journals that aren't open access, they all you are now submitting it online as well. So it's, there's not a heck of a lot of difference. And even we've often, when it comes time to make a decision about where to publish, there were always journals that were, well, not necessarily bottom feeders, but things that are not very well read, are unlikely to ever be seen. Mendel published his work in the 1860s in a Bavarian journal that disappeared, and it wasn't until 1901 that it was rediscovered. So there is a cost to publishing in little-known journals. So we were always, when it comes time to publish a paper, you're always thinking, okay, what's the best journal I can publish in? Oftentimes it also pays to have a look at who the reviewers are. Or not the reviewers, I'm sorry, the editor is, or the associate editors. Oftentimes we know these editors as well, and so we know this is a reputable journal because I know this individual. Any questions? Yes? Well, many of them ask you for to suggest names to reviewers, because it's very difficult for an editor, oftentimes, that gets a paper. They often, who's the best people? And so you can actually, in fact, PLOS One insists that you give them the names of 3 possible reviewers. Whether they use them or not is another matter. They also allow you oftentimes to say, do not send this paper to this individual. Whether they act on that or not, I don't know. I've never put anyone in that category. But yeah, sometimes you do know. I mean, and even in the older journals, I know a number of reviewers who always sign their reviews. They just believe that, if they're going to make any comment, they don't care whether you know who it is or not. Yeah.
Discuss just briefly your experience with...
Sorry, we have to use the mic for taking.
Can you discuss your experience with traditional publishing and print journals, if you had such experience before you started publishing in the open access journals? And I guess as a follow-up to that, assuming that you've been at universities that had some sort of a promotion and tenure system, have you, how has that been received, publishing in open access versus print journals?
Well, again, I don't think it makes a difference anymore as long as you're publishing in journals that are, as I say, I would not publish in something that's not indexed by PubMed or one of the other major indexes. And again, I mean, the primary goal is always, I want this in the very best journal I can possibly send it to. And so you start high, cross your fingers, and see how it goes. I mean, yeah, my experience in publishing goes all the way back to submitting it in paper, having to do the black and white figures all on my own, all the way to the future now. The vast majority of them, it's all online. They take Word documents or any number of other forms of documents. Nowadays, there's lots of journals that allow for supplemental information to be sent along as well. So in that regard, I mean, there's not a heck of a lot of difference that I've noticed. In terms of, tenure and promotion committees, obviously, you know, they're looking for the same sorts of things. And so when they see, you know, when I look at packets, when I see journals, if I don't know the journal name, then I do go online and see if it is indexed by PubMed, it is peer reviewed. And, you know, at that point, you know, I count it.
Perhaps I don't understand how the impact factors of journals works, but I would guess
No
that
one does.
yeah, maybe this is a question a librarian could help answer. Is because the open access journals are just newer to the publication world, I would guess that their impact factors would have to be less. They just haven't been around long enough to be recognized
but that's
or
the same
cited.
with brand new, with any new journal.
Yeah.
And that factor also varies depending upon the field as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brazeau, for sharing that with us, publishing in open access. My name is Bethany Kenyon. I am a librarian here at the Portland campus. I'm also the administrator of our open access resource. It's DUNE, Digital UNE. Everybody said it once. Thanks, guys. Really what DUNE is you. So what's a repository? I'm sorry, I'm not clicking. I should be clicking. There we go. So when I say repository, what do I mean? You maybe have heard in connection with JFK, the book repository. It's not a term that gets tossed around a lot, but it really means a place where you keep things safe. So at UNE, everybody does a lot of really great work, and library services began to realize that you may or may not have quick gathered access to it. So around January last year, we decided to try to figure out a way to collect, preserve, and provide access to the creative and scholarly works and unique resources like library special collections of the UNE community. And what we came up with was DUNE, Digital UNE. DUNE is an online platform. It's hosted by Berkeley Press, this very prestigious group out in Berkeley who are meant to help colleges and universities out. They started with faculty, but now they're helping everybody in colleges and universities out. Their hosted repository service is called Digital Commons, and that's what DUNE is. DUNE is hosted on Digital Commons, so this is a hosted service. If you have a second or at some time in the future, go to dune.une.edu. You'll see what I'm talking about. That's a screenshot of the front page of DUNE. So what will you see when you go there? We started out DUNE, we wanted to really show off student works. Those are some of the things, you know, how many among you in your undergraduate and graduate time have worked so hard on a research paper for hours and hours and days and weeks? You hand it in, and maybe you never see it again. Maybe because you don't need to, you know, maybe you lost it. Anything like that, I know I have, definitely. We wanted to make sure that that doesn't happen in the future, and you know, we hope we can get a hold of some stuff that might have been lost, but we can save it. We're really interested in the work you're doing, and we really want to show it off to the world. So right here on screen are examples of two of our PT students' research posters. So, you know, many of the departments at UNE have these great research sessions where what everybody's doing is shown off in this really great, colorful, quick version of what they've been working on. So that's one thing that you'll find in there is research posters. Again, student works. We were really excited to start gathering and showing off student theses. So we have examples of master's degree students and undergraduate honors theses as well. The example up here on screen is from a UNE student whose name is Vanessa ODonnell. And she's actually, this thesis right here on screen is the single most popular item in DUNE to date. It has over 200 hits. Everybody loves it. I haven't checked exactly where they are accessing it from, but it is hugely popular. And that's actually been the case. I mean, granted, we haven't put up a lot of faculty work yet. We will soon, and I imagine that will get a lot of hits too. But other students are really interested in seeing what kind of subjects their peers are working on, and you know, the quality of this work. I don't actually know what what, for instance, a marine benthic diatom is. That's what Vanessa's work focused on. But if I did, I'll bet I'd be excited about it because it's really high quality. DUNE right now has images. What you're seeing are two examples of library special collections, images from library special collections. The top one is from NEOC, New England Osteopathic Heritage Center. That's the opening of a hospital, and that's why you can see it's celebratory balloons everywhere. The second one is from our Maine Women Writers collection. That is the Margaret Jane Mussey Sweat photo album. That's Margaret there, and that is her favorite dog. I love that photo. We have videos on DUNE. These are two examples of student works. These are the results of a couple grants, that the Center for Excellence in Interprofessional Education supported. So these are student research projects, and these are two videos which came from that. One was from the pain symposium that happened last year. Loads of you, I'm sure, actually went to that. And then another one is a student who wanted to look into the effects or how advisable it is to give unsolicited health information when you're outside of your office. They're actually really interesting. Definitely go check them out. DUNE can host books. What you're seeing up here is an example of, again, some of the library special collections. Tower 1968. Tower is the Westbrook College History Collection and Westbrook Junior College. Yearbooks. We have a ton of them. They are a lot of fun. If you have a nanosecond and you want to see what 1940, 1960 looked like, there it is. Underneath that is the Annals of the Cobweb Club. It's this great old kind of a journal / book. Just this club, I'm trying to remember, it was Margaret Jane Mussey Sweat again, and she was just archiving and writing down what happened back when this club was meeting. It's really pretty, nice to look at. And in the bottom right corner, you can see one of the art gallery, UNE Art Gallery's exhibition catalogs. Upon reflection, this was a photograph exhibition. They're beautiful. You can page through them right on DUNE. Papers. These are two examples of student papers in DUNE. These are research reports. Again, these are from the grants from CEIPE. Articles. Just this morning, Dr. Brazeau became the first faculty member to have some of his published articles placed also in DUNE. That's right, it's very exciting. He thus becomes an example, a really good example of this green repository, open access publishing. These articles that you'll find for him on DUNE right now were published elsewhere, but their publishers were amenable to doing secondary copies on repositories. And as it turns out, that's actually a pretty high level of publishers will allow some form of published works to again be archived, which is part of what the repository does. So I showed you what's in it now, and I want to let you know that what could be in it is just nearly anything. So I just kind of want you to think about what you've been working on, what you've heard other people are working on. You heard a faculty member mention how there's this collection of cool old books. Whatever it is, if you're thinking about it and it's at UNE, we would like to hear about it. I showed you the types of things that are on there now, but UNE can host the results of conferences, conference papers. It can actually host journals that you guys would create. So for instance, if you're thinking to yourself, boy, I would really love to see a journal that talks about residency experiences. Maybe you're not finding that and you'd like to create that. You have a ton of peers who talk about it all the time. DUNE actually has the capability to host a journal, and it can be a peer-reviewed journal if that's the direction you'd like to go with that. So that's actually a pretty neat possibility / service. We can archive blogs. They're digital. We can hold on to them, keep them safe forever. I showed you books, but we can do chapters, pieces of books. I showed you some images, but those were older archival images. We can do art shows on DUNE, that type of thing. I showed you video clips, but we can also do audio recordings. There are some great examples of interviews, historical interviews that are up there, and those are, again, they're kept safe, they're accessible. Data sets and gray papers, things that may not have had a space in the publishing world up until now. I think Dr. Brazeau talked about that. You go too long, nobody's really interested in taking the time and money to get that out there. But if you have all these great pieces of information that somebody somewhere might be interested in, repositories are a great way to get them out there, open access repositories like DUNE. So if you think of something, so again, I'm going to do a little pitch. If you think of something and it is or can be made digital, the library can help. We have a scanner and a camera, a digital camera, and we can try to make that happen. So I showed you what's in it for you. Why would you be interested in contributing to DUNE? It makes you and your work easy to find. So it's search engine optimized, and it's Google optimized. Let's be serious, we all start there. That's just the way it goes these days. So you're going to be toward the top of the list, and that's a really great thing. It gives your work a permanent home. Have you ever come across a broken URL? Because I sure have. When your work goes into DUNE, it gets an address that never changes. And that's really great because think about in the future, maybe you email a potential collaborator or a granting body or a potential future employer, and you want to show them your work, and then 3 years down the line, they'd like to go back to it, and they can't get to it because it's somewhere else. It's a journal that no longer exists. It was on some very ephemeral website. Again, that's not the case in DUNE. Once it's in here, they're going to be able to find it. You're going to be able to send out a link to get them to it very quickly. One really positive thing that folks tend to like is you get feedback. When you put your work on DUNE, you get emails when it's been accessed. So straight away, you get to see, oh yeah, people are actually interested in my work, they're using it. That's a pretty big deal. And once you place your work on DUNE, it gives a context. On the byline of your work, it probably says you were at the University of New England when you completed this work, but how great is it for a granting body or really anyone to see that this work was completed along with the works of all these fantastic other faculty and peers with all these great facilities, all these wonderful things going on. So placing your work in DUNE puts you in the context of UNE visually immediately when someone lands on your paper. And not just in the context of UNE, it also places you in the context. I told you about how Digital Commons, this platform that DUNE is on, it actually hosts repositories for over 200 other academic institutions. So once your work goes into DUNE, it is in the context through something called the Digital Commons Network of all the works of all the people who have put their stuff in those other academic institutions, institutional repositories, excuse me. So it broadens your world, the world in which your work lives. But you do not have to worry about putting your work on DUNE. You do not have to worry about fees. This is open access. This is an example of green. We're not charging you anything. It's this really great service. We're happy to do it for you. You're not going to be giving up your rights as an author. DUNE takes no rights at all. We take what you give us. So if you didn't publish your work anywhere else and you retain your rights, then you keep your rights when you give a copy to DUNE. If you happen to publish somewhere else and you've given your copyright to the publisher, that's okay. They get to keep it, which would be the only way they would allow us to put it up on our site. And you keep whatever rights it was that you had, but we don't take any rights away from anyone. You also won't lose too much time. This is my job. I'm the administrator of this repository, and I'm going to take the time to research whether or not it's okay for your stuff to be on DUNE. I'm going to work with you to get the right version. I'm going to be the one putting it up digitally online, so it doesn't take too much time to contribute to DUNE. And you won't lose your chance at traditional publication, even if it's gold OA publication. A lot of people have a misconception that if it goes on open access, that's it. You're never going to be able to publish anything ever again because it's been out there in the world. And it's not untrue that there are a handful of publishers who feel that way still. But Beth had a slide up where about 70% of publishers allow some version of a work that maybe they have already published or they're looking at publishing be out in the world, and that is true. And again, I'm going to be doing the research to find out, to make sure, not find out, to make sure that your chances at whatever it is you're trying to do with your work won't be harmed. So here's the point where I'm supposed to say OA is definitely okay. But I want to make sure that you understand that it's not just me up here rah-rah for open access because I have this great product that I want you to contribute to. I've got some feedback from a couple of people who already have contributed to DUNE, aside from Dr. Brazeau, who's only had about 3 hours to have the feeling of being a contributor. So this is Vanessa ODonnell, who I showed you her work a little bit earlier. She, again, was one of our master's degree students in marine science down at the Biddeford campus. And she does have the most popular work in DUNE. She has received the email feedback, and she has been able to show other people where her work lives really quickly with a link. And so she, in this feedback, was just saying to me that she thinks it's a great way to have it be easily accessible. Potential employers really like having the instant access. She's had positive feedback from collaborators and co-authors, and she likes receiving the updates. Just one more contributor who let me know how she felt about contributing to DUNE. This is Emily Zimmerman. She was one of our undergraduate students down at the Biddeford campus in marine biology. She contributed her undergraduate thesis. And she told me that she had heard of open access. She had kind of tossed it around with her colleagues before. They weren't really sure how they would use it, if ever. But then she did contribute her thesis to DUNE, and she's really happy about it. She thinks it's a great way to keep that type of stuff secure, where it will never get lost. It will never be some forgotten thing that she worked on for years and then never found again. Not the case once it's on DUNE. And again, she really likes the notifications. So the feedback is really a positive part. So this is an example of green open access. It is your resource. So we really want to show the world, and we really want to keep safe the things that you've been doing at UNE. So please consider talking to me at any point in time. I'm over in the library. Just think about what you've been working on and see if maybe we could make it accessible to the world. So am I? Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Does anyone have any questions? Smart. Contact me at any time with questions.
Okay. Well, we want to thank everybody for coming. We do have, these are the references that we've referred to in the slideshow and a list of websites. We can, if anybody is interested in this presentation, we'd be happy to share it. You could just send an email. It's also being archived by video. And, you know, thanks a lot. It's definitely something that you will hear more and more about as you continue with your studies and with your career. It's definitely not going away, and some people think it's going to sort of supplant the traditional publishing model of scholarly communication that we've had to date. It could look very different. So good luck with everything, and have a great day. Thanks.